years discontinuing the making of their iPod. Now, if you're not sure what an iPod is, or if you thought round, tasty, red fruit when I used the word apple, I'm not really sure what to say about that. But most people, I think, would recognize and remember what an iPod is, or at least was. Perhaps you still have one kicking around in a drawer somewhere before your phone simply made the thing kind of redundant. But for its time, the iPod was a revolutionary piece of technology. Upon a relatively short period of time beforehand, if a person wanted to listen to music, they had to have a physical version of it in some form or another. Prior to the digital age, that was, of course, CDs. Some of you are thinking, they don't use CDs anymore? Afraid not, Back in my youthful days, we rocked out to cassettes. All the endless hours of making those mixed tapes, with all your favorite tunes. You play the song, you record it on a blank tape. The good old days. And then, the tape would get eaten and you'd have to get the pencil out and tighten it back up and never worked the same. But it was so much fun. And before cassettes, there were records. You remember records, or as we called them back then, albums, which is so very interesting because today, when a band records new songs for them to put together and sell, they still call them albums when they put them out, even though there's no such thing as a physical album anymore. We still use language like that. When you record your favorite TV show or the hockey game, the Bruins are gone and the Leafs are gone, I'm just saying. How many times do you say, I need to tape that, right? That's because you grew up using VCRs with those cassette tapes. Or how many movies, they still call them films, don't they? Even though there's no such thing really as film anymore. But now, music has basically gone digital. I was in the house of some friends of my parents recently, and downstairs, they still had a stereo, this huge machine with a dual cassette deck in it. It was massive. It took up so much space, and they had this giant collection of dusty tapes for them to play. And the whole setup took up an entire wall cabinet in their basement. But interesting, the songs they had in their collections, the pretty old ones there, that would have only been just a tiny fraction of the amount that I have on my Spotify playlists. And because, everything is streamed now over the internet instead of being stored on something like an iPod, a physical thing, those iPods, they became like Blockbuster video stores, just outdated and irrelevant. It's hard to believe how fast technology's come in the last 20 years. I saw an article this week about a church that is using this 3D holographic projector. So the pastor stands in a box in one place and he looks real. He looks completely solid and real as they project this at all of their satellite churches rather than looking at like an old-fashioned TV or screen. He's actually physically right there. That just kind of geeks me out a little bit. But even with so much of this happening so fast, I think we're kind of becoming accustomed to it, so that we're not really all that amazed by it anymore. When I was a kid, if I wanted to watch a movie, you either you had to go and watch it in the theater or wait for like a year for it to be shown on television with all of those commercials in the middle of it too. Now, every movie ever made, plus a ton that you've probably never heard of, are all out there to stream whenever we want to. Whenever your favorite musician releases a new album, you don't have to go and get up early and wait in line out at Sam the Record Man's, right? Or listen for hours on the radio for the song to finally play, and you can hit record on your dual cassette tape to finally get it. No, it just automatically appears in your playlist on Spotify. And so I think the excitement level on things like this, it's not really there anymore. There's never been more to listen to. There's never been more to watch, to be entertained by. And yet, kids and even adults everywhere, we still, with the remote or our phones in our hand, we sigh and we say, I'm bored. Because the abundance of it all alcohol simply does not provide us with joy, but rather, I think, at times, indifference to everything, even life itself. The final church that Jesus spoke to in the early chapters of the book of Revelation, they had some indifference going on. Now, the apathy they experienced was not out of this overload of music and movies for them to watch, but they did have an abundance of other stuff that seemed to dull their sense of focus. Here's how John puts it, and he records the words of Jesus to the church in Laodicea in Revelation chapter 3. Well, there's an iPod. I had to pick it in case you didn't know what one was. Where Jesus says, again, I know all the things you do, that you are neither hot nor cold. I wish that you were one or the other, but since you are like lukewarm water, neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Boy, lukewarmness. That is not a desirable definition, is it? If I ordered, a cup of coffee, thanks Vince for bringing me one from Starbucks, another shameless plug. But if I wanted to get a cup of coffee, I want it to be piping hot, right? That's the secret to an excellent brew. Good quality beans and super hot water just compressed through those beans. Lukewarm coffee, it's gross, isn't it? But on a hot, sticky, yucky summer day, after I mow the lawn, I don't want to go in and have a room temperature glass of water. No, I want that thing packed full of ice so it will quench my thirst and help bring my body temperature back down to semi-normal at least. When you're at a restaurant and you order something and your food arrives, you want it to be piping hot, steaming on your plate, right? Not just barely warm sitting on the counter for 20 minutes before it gets to you. Now, stuff like that is either meant to be deliciously hot or refreshingly cold. Jesus told his followers in the city of Laodicea, at the church there, that they were neither one or the other. Now, some have gotten confused over the years by his words here, I believe. They think he's referring to the faith of these Christians, and they understand why would he want their faith. They can get it. I can understand Jesus saying, "I want your faith to be hot and passionate, be on fire for Jesus," as we like to say. But why would he want their faith to be cold? Right? That seems kind of like the opposite of what a person's faith should be. Oh, that person's faith is icy cold. Good for them. But a bit of historical and geographical context helps us a little bit here. Laodicea was located in an area that contained some fairly sophisticated water systems for their time. And there were these aqueducts that were built that transferred water into the city. It doesn't sound like much to us, but we're kind of spoiled. Back then, that would have made it so convenient to get water to where they were living. But since it lacked the cooling methods we have today, drinking that water, while it was safe, it was kind of gross, to say the least. Warm water, it will keep you alive if you're stuck out in the desert, but it certainly doesn't have that appetizing content compared to when it is ice cold. And Laodicea also had these hot springs in the area that provided the first century equivalent of hot tubs, basically, where people could go and soak their aching bodies after a hard day's work, or, like David, when you're in your 40s playing basketball and nearly dying last night. But they were also filled with these minerals which provided to be medicinal in nature. And so you take this into consideration, and Jesus speaks these words, and his followers, they would have, their minds would have lit up knowing what he was talking about. They would have understood his connection. Because a hot bath is so comforting, even healing. And a cold drink is so pleasant and even energizing. But lukewarm water, it might keep you alive, but it's not attractive in the least, and it might even turn your stomach and make you sick. Well, the number of times I have thrown up in my life, it's not really that many. My stomach seems to be able to take quite a bit of punishment. I'm on medicines that a lot of people just can't use. I'll leave it at that. But now that I've said that, of course, Murphy's Law is going to kick in, and I'm going to get like the Norwalk virus this week, just everywhere. But I can literally remember the handful of times that I have gotten sick. Once was when Francine and I, kind of in the early days of our relationship, just got together. There was no kids. We were just footloose and free to do whatever we wanted. And so we were eating at Pizza the Lake, back when it was at the jail, back when it was good and tasty. Remember that? And I was feeling fine that day, and afterwards we had to make a run to Shoppers Drug Mart to pick something up, and I was waiting in line at the pharmacy behind several people when suddenly things started to change. I started feeling a little bit icky for some reason. My guts were churning. I had no idea, where the bathroom was in this place, if they even had one. And back then I was the kind of the quiet and shy type. Things have changed a little bit. But so I just kind of, sat there in line waiting to talk to the pharmacist. Well, after a few minutes, my hands were shaking and the sweat was just pouring off my head. I was just feeling awful. I finally got to the front of the line, got to the pharmacist, asked if there was a bathroom. She said, yes, there was. Left it at that. Didn't elaborate, so I asked where it was. She gave me directions down the hall up here to the left. Literally, I turned around, took one step, and the contents of my stomach decided to make an entrance, all right? Now, instinctively, brilliantly, of course, I held up my hands thinking that was a good idea. To catch, I was being nice, catch all the mess that was going to be made. That was a bad idea, it turned out, because now my hands were covered as well as the floor, and I made it to the bathroom, regurgitated the rest of my supper into the toilet, washed my hands, and quickly left embarrassed, feeling terrible for the poor guy making minimum wage who had to mop up my supper after that. Now, I learned two things from that experience. Don't wait to ask where the bathroom is, and don't try and catch your vomit, ever, okay? Just don't. Now, if you think that's gross, I didn't even give you the really gross. I could go into detail. But you think that's gross, my friends? This is the terminology that Jesus used in the Bible, okay? So I'm just speaking like Jesus. I'm just speaking the word, okay? He said, because you are lukewarm in your faith, I am going to spit you out of my mouth. Literally, Jesus said, I'm going to vomit you out of my mouth. He says, you're not living out your faith in ways that are comforting and healing to other people. Your actions are not bringing refreshment to others. You have become so comfortable and apathetic, so lukewarm, it makes me sick. And then he goes on and adds to what he just said. You say, I am rich. I have everything I want. I don't need a thing. And you don't realize that you are wretched, miserable, and poor, and blind, and naked. And so I advise you to buy gold from me, gold that has been purified by fire. Then you will be rich. Also buy white garments from me, so you will not be shamed by your nakedness. An ointment for your eyes, so you will be able to see. I correct and discipline everyone I love. So be diligent and turn from your indifference. You are poor and blind and naked. Perhaps an odd choice of words to describe these people, but take note of what the city of Laodicea was so well known for. It was, first of all, incredibly wealthy. It had accumulated riches because of its industries and businesses, primarily the two main ones of a kind of a very popular black cloth made from sheep wool of the sheep in their area, and the manufacturing of an eye salve that helped and healed many people's eye ailments. The clothing business was very, very productive. It put them on the map. And Laodicea, they even had a medical school in their city. They were so advanced at the time, on top of this amazing eye salve, this ointment they had, they were actually performing a kind of cataract surgery in the 1st century. So these industries, plus the fact that the city was a major banking center for the entire province, this made Laodicea incredibly wealthy and well known. So wealthy, so very proud of its accomplishments, that actually in the year 60 AD, after an earthquake came and devastated, destroyed so much of their city, when the Roman government stepped in and offered them assistance to rebuild their city, they declined their offer. They said, "No, thank you. We don't need your money." And they rebuilt everything, paid for it all themselves. I don't know what's more amazing about that. The fact that they could afford to do all that, or that they turned down funding from the government. I don't know. And so they had all of this available to them. This lucrative clothing industry, an advanced medical school, and eye salve that helped so many with their sight, and enough money, enough cash to possibly have competed with Elon Musk buying out Twitter. And yet, with that in our minds, Jesus says to them, "You are naked and blind and poor." You see the connections between those? Do you feel the tension? Jesus tells his followers, you have so much, and yet you are doing so little. It appears the wealth and the success of this city had seeped into the church, causing the people there to become lukewarm in their faith, indifferent. And I wonder how often Jesus looks at his church today and thinks the very same thing. I gave up my life for you. I sacrificed everything I had so that the world would know how much I love them. And my followers, so many are just going through the motions. Their faith is lukewarm. They are bored with their journey. And honestly, if you did a real search inside, would you define your faith right now as an exciting crusade or just kind of meh? Would you say your journey with Jesus is life lived to its fullest, an adventure into the holy wild? Or does it barely have a pulse? Maybe you're in the middle somewhere, like a lot of Jesus followers. Not really that excited about your faith, but feeling kind of mediocre, or just honestly kind of bored with it all some days, right? And apathy has seeped in, this indifference. Now, why that spark has grown dim is different for everyone. And honestly, life can wear us down, can't it? All that busyness, working too much. For others, it's who we're around often. People who can suck the energy out of us in their life choices. And they're actually pulling us down in our faith more than we're pulling them towards Jesus. We can even feel like we're doing lots. We're part of the church. We're all busy, Christians busy doing Christian church activities and events and studies and gatherings and connection times. Oh, we can be so busy doing church stuff, actively involved with church. But because we spend so much time doing church, we can forget to be the church. A light in the darkness, a hospital to the sick, a home for the lost and the lonely. And so Jesus reminds his people, let me help you to be rich in where it counts. Like gold refined in the fire, be rich in mercy and in good deeds. Allow me to dress you in white so people will see that you are different. That your goodness, your selflessness comes from something that is beyond yourself. Allow me to open your eyes so that you can see people like I do. Alone, hurting, broken, needing to be cared for and loved, needing to be offered hope. There are so many issues that can make the church irrelevant and unattractive in our world. Whenever it tolerates sin and the people inside look no different than anybody else. When there's fighting within, disharmony, a lack of unity, because when we forget about what's important and we focus on stupid things, love always loses. But the other thing that can make the church look this way is the apathy, the indifference of the people who make it up, right? When we lose that spark that makes our faith real. Maybe it's like what happened in Laodicea all those years ago. We have so much at our disposal that we've become comfortable in our journey. We've lost sight of our mission. Maybe our indifference comes from the possibility that our lives honestly have too much sin in them. We're all different. So interesting. This letter ends with one final comment from Jesus. He says, look, I stand at the door and knock. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in, and we will share a meal together as friends. You've probably heard this verse. Often we can use this text as a way of thinking that Jesus is knocking on the doors of the hearts of non-believers for them to open up and welcome him into their lives. That's all right. But just remember to whom Jesus is speaking to here. He is speaking to his church, to his followers. He's asking them to let him back in because they had inadvertently pushed him outside and locked the door. Because it's possible to call yourself a church and not have Jesus inside. My friends and fellow Jesus followers, may we endeavor to never become bored in our faith. To let indifference settle in and cause us to forget about our mission. And for us to be the body of Christ. His hands and his feet with Jesus firmly attached to us. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this adventure through the letters that Jesus spoke to your church, to all these different churches throughout the region 2,000 years ago. And Father, to the church today. We have so much to learn, so much to be thankful for, grateful for, and yet so much to work on. And I pray through the power of your word, the work of your Spirit, changing our hearts from within, you would help us to become more and more like Jesus every day. That you would dress us in white so that the world would see us, would see Christ in us, would see an attractive quality in us that they desire. That you would open our eyes so that we would be able to see the world through your eyes, not our own busy, selfish world where we get drawn in and distracted so easily. In so much that we become apathetic to the mission that we've been given. Help us to see, God, the people around us and the love that they need, the love that we have to be shared. And God, help us to be poor in so much wealth that we forget about what's important. We get distracted. Help us to be poor in spirit so that in you we can be strong. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for his willingness to go to the cross and die for our sins. Help us, Father, to never stand in the way of people knowing him because of our selfishness, because of our sin. Father, help us to see Christ working in this world through us so that the world can know that you sent him. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.